So let's bring in someone who was in the courtroom, the room where it happened, MSNBC host of The Last Word, Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence, what was your takeaway from the testimony, the cross-examination, the redirect, everything that she went through on the stand and how she responded, and how, importantly, the jurors responded to her? Because the people in the overflow room don't see that, and we can only read exactly the verbatim of what's going on.
Well, of course, the jurors are always the mystery in every courtroom, and that's a good thing. We really don't have any idea what they're thinking. I can't say that at the beginning of this cross-examination of Stormy Daniels, which began on Tuesday, I had a perfect view of all of the jurors that entire time, and none of them were taking notes at any time. That doesn't tell you anything really one way or the other, but there certainly was not a moment that they thought was worthy of, I want to make sure I make a memory of that. And today went very, very slowly, and it was a cross-examination today that was about an hour longer than it needed to be. A full hour went by before Susan Necheles actually went into that hotel room to get Stormy Daniels' testimony about what happened in that hotel room. And once you got to that hotel room, it was a matter of playing different quotes against her over different times. So there was an interview she gave about this in 2011 that was constantly being brought up to her in Touch magazine. And the basic difference between what she said in that interview, which was I'd say, the most spare account of this whole thing, and the prosecutor on redirect pointed out that the article itself said that it was lightly edited, so that this is an edited version of what Stormy Daniels said. But she didn't include every quote line, every single detail that she has included in her later accounts and in her testimony in this courtroom today. But what's also known about her testimony in the courtroom today is she did not include details that she has included elsewhere before, because the defense didn't want those details included. And so there's a defense team here that did a lot of work to limit what Stormy Daniels could say here, and then spent a fair amount of time talking about how she hasn't said it exactly the way she said it before in other places. And listen, that's a game that witnesses have to face. And normally the statements that are being put in front of them are things they've said in previous under oath testimony, whether it be a deposition or grand jury testimony or something like that. Here it's interviews on 60 Minutes and an interview within Touch magazine. And it's a thing that all witnesses have to go through. But what was never really addressed by the defense was what happened in that hotel room. Susan Necheles, in her cross-examination question, suggested that nothing happened in that hotel room. But the problem with that as an evidentiary matter in this case is the only way the defense can introduce evidence of what happened in that courtroom is for the defendant, in the hotel room, is for the defendant, Donald Trump, to take the witness stand and swear under oath what happened in that hotel room. We know Donald Trump is not going to take the witness stand in this case because he couldn't answer questions about every aspect of the case. And so basically Stormy Daniels' testimony about what actually happened in the hotel room will go uncontested to this jury. And the most important other piece of evidence, not related to the hotel room, that the jury will have is a transcript of the Access Hollywood video that describes Donald Trump's approach to women, his sexually assaultive approach to women. And so they're going to know that that guy said that, and that's that guy's motto about how to approach women in this world. And now he's alone in a hotel room with Stormy Daniels. And the defense, simply through a question that was denied, wants to suggest to that jury that Donald Trump, alone with Stormy Daniels, in that hotel room did not have sex with her. I don't see any possible way a juror is going to be able to argue that point in the jury room.
It's Chris Jansing here, Lawrence. Yeah, there was one fairly long section where Susan Necheles kept, it seemed like, trying to get her to say what the meaning of the word dinner was when she really didn't eat, and you're wondering why is she going on and on and on. That is one of the things that took place in that room. But there are also then all of these questions about whether she was just saying all of this, making it up, obviously, is the clear implication here. In fact, she basically said that because she wanted to make money. I'm going to read you a couple of quick little back and forths that you actually saw and heard. They were talking about the documentary that was on Peacock. You were paid $125,000 for the doc. No, I was not. I have not received all of it. You're trying to trick me into saying something that isn't entirely true. You misconstrued that. I was quoting some women who came up to me. I was not selling myself to anyone. And then repeatedly, show me where I said that. And I wonder how you think the jury, well, again, you can't get into the mind of the jury, but how you read that. Did she come across as quick? Did she come across as well prepared? Maybe by her lawyer who tweeted that picture? Both? How did you think Stormy Daniels presented today to the jury?
She presented as a normal person with normal reactions on a witness stand. And so most of her testimony was done in the yes or no style that courtrooms are used to, and was not contentious, wasn't really struggling with the defense attorney. But a certain amount of it includes Stormy Daniels' personal inability to step away from the battle of wits. And an example is Susan Necheles said to her, so in your profession, you make up stories about sex. And her answer was, no, the sex is real, just like in that room. And so that's the danger that you have as a defense lawyer cross-examining Stormy Daniels. You never know where that little hook is going to come back in, where she's saying the sex in that room with Donald Trump was real. And there's no counter to that at all, none from the defense, Stormy Daniels' testimony about the actual sex. And so that's, and I think jurors completely understand feeling put upon in the questioning, or when they put up tweets of the attacks on Stormy Daniels that she replied to, and she made the point, I never started attacks on Twitter, but I replied to attacks on Twitter. And her replies were always an attempt at a witty kind of reply to that. But so this jury could see that this woman has a history of being attacked over this very subject, that this defense attorney is not the first person who's doing that to her. And so it's someone who's, in her view, in her presentation of self, trying to tell a story, and she's trying to tell that story with people out there who hate her, who attack her all the time. And now there's a defense attorney who's trying to upset her. That's the point. And I don't think the jury holds it against the defense attorney that she's trying to upset Stormy Daniels or knock her off balance in her testimony. But I don't think that was achieved on any relevant point at all. What you always have to do when you're listening to testimony, especially on cross-examination and defense, is how much of this is actually relevant. And it's extremely common for a massive amount of it to have nothing to do with the charges in the case. And that certainly was true of the cross-examination today.
And Lawrence, that very exchange is something we talked about here earlier because it stood out as, a real example of her combativeness, her responsiveness, her defending herself, but also giving more information and in a very granular way. I don't know how that impacts on the jury, but the fact that she then went on to say, Necheles, trying to pin her down, said, well, you make up stories, and you made up stories about Mr. Trump, something to that effect. We read it earlier, and she said, no, if that happened, if I were making that up, it would be a better story, if it were fictional. Mm-hmm. So she's just in the moment and very smart and giving, but also, according to someone who was watching this, I think from the overflow room, noting earlier, she seemed, upset and emotional about the exchanges of people who were harassing her on social media, on Twitter, and that she was being combative with that because she did feel threatened or under attack, that her life has changed. And as she pointed out on Redirect, it's changed for the worse because of everything that transpired.
Yeah, and I would say in the room tonally, I wouldn't say combative. I would say that it was responsive, meaning if something aggressive is said to her, as was said a few times. And by the way, Susan Necheles did not raise her voice. She didn't yell. So I think when no one's raising their voice in there. Stormy Daniels never raises her voice in any way. She never sounds angry in her reply. In fact, it's a kind of dinner table tone on both ends of that conversation that just includes some pointed questions to which Stormy Daniels' reply is, I think, what it would have been, what it would sound like anyway, and what it would sound like tonally if you were just at a dinner table with her and you heard this kind of exchange. And I've been in courtrooms where it does get very loud and very angry, and I've heard lawyers yell, and I've heard witnesses get extremely angry and genuinely combative. That's not really what we saw here. I mean, I've seen talk shows get more combative than this. I've seen cable news interviews get way more combative.
So have we all.
And so, yeah, exactly. And so it was a pretty normal, I'd say, balance of cross-examination where I don't think Susan Necheles was trying to pull any stunts, and I don't think Stormy Daniels was trying to, it pulled stunts on her side of these exchanges. But what is absolutely true is you can't ever quite be sure where the Stormy Daniels answer will end, because she might just throw something on the tail end of a short sentence or right after a yes that actually is relevant in some way, like that line about in her movies, the sex is real, just like in that hotel room.